Picture this, a town where life moves quietly by day, but at night, silence becomes its own warning. Hollowfield isn't like other towns. Here, whispers die before they reach the air. Shadows stretch longer, darker, and more menacing. And when someone disappears, there's always a clue left behind, a single white rose, not as a gesture of kindness, but as a chilling signature. What would you do if the place you called home was controlled by fear? If every street, every face, and every moment seemed to hold a secret too dangerous to uncover? This is Hollowfield, a town where roses bloom, not in gardens, but in the wake of death. Hollowfield wasn't always a town of shadows. Decades ago, it was a beacon of hope, a place where hard-working families built lives of promise. The steel mills never stopped humming, and the warm glow of their furnaces lit up the night sky. Life here was simple, honest, until the light faded and the promises turned to whispers. As the factories closed and the jobs disappeared, so did the laughter. What was left behind was a town that kept its head down, its doors locked, and its truths buried. Something else began to grow in the cracks of Hollowfield's silence. Fear, and with it came a name no one dared to speak aloud: the Syndicate. The Hollowfield Syndicate was no ordinary gang. It wasn't a group of thugs operating from the shadows. It was an empire built on manipulation, intimidation, and violence. At the center of it all was Dominic Rinaldi, known to the town as the Gardener, a man who tended not to flowers, but to fear. Rinaldi's reach extended to every corner of Hollowfield, from the police chief to the mayor's office, from the school board to the factory union. There wasn't a decision made in this town that didn't pass through his hands first. They said he could buy anyone, control anything, but his signature wasn't his power. They called him the Gardener because he left no loose ends, and just like his roses, his methods were immaculate. If someone crossed him, they didn't just disappear, they were erased. The message was always the same: a white rose left behind as a chilling reminder that Hollowfield belonged to him. It started with whispers. A businessman vanishes after refusing to pay his debts. A union leader disappears just days before a strike. Then came the white roses. At first, they were a mystery, dismissed as coincidence. But as the disappearances grew, so did the fear. The roses weren't just a calling card. They were a warning, a symbol of control, of power, of something much darker growing beneath the surface of this town. By then, Hollowfield's silence wasn't just an act of survival. It was a way of life. No one asked questions, no one talked about the roses, and no one dared to stand up to the Syndicate until one man decided he wouldn't look away. Do you think you'd notice the signs before it was too late? Or would you become another name, lost to Hollowfield's silence? Stay with us as we unravel the chilling secrets of a town where trust is a luxury and silence is survival. Hollowfield was a town of two worlds. By day, life played out in harmony. Like a forgotten painting of simpler times, workers lined up at the steel mills, their hands rough from years of honest labor. Children raced each other on bicycles through cobblestone streets, their laughter cutting through the hum of passing trains. Families gathered in front yards, sharing the last rays of sunlight as the aroma of home-cooked meals filled the air. To the untrained eye, Hollowfield looked like the perfect postcard, a working-class haven untouched by the chaos of the outside world. Doors locked early, curtains were drawn tight, and the once friendly town seemed to hold its breath and amplify into blackness. They're already breaking, but tragedy seemed to hold its breath. They said Hollowfield was a place of unspeakable beauty by day and unimaginable terror by night. Whispers traveled fast in the shadows, but no one dared speak too loud, because in Hollowfield, the night belonged to them. The Syndicate? The rules were simple. Don't ask questions, don't meddle, and most importantly, don't trust anyone. It was a town where loyalty meant survival, and silence was its own kind of currency. A single rumor could mark you, and a misplaced word could seal your fate. People disappeared often enough that it stopped being news, because in Hollowfield, you learned to look the other way. By morning, the town would awaken like nothing had happened. But for the families left behind, the silence was deafening. They didn't ask where their loved ones had gone, or who might be responsible. Hollowfield had taught them well. No one wanted to be next. But there was always the rose, left like a cruel signature, Its meaning was clear. It wasn't just a message, it was a reminder. In Hollowfield, no one escaped the shadows. The roses of Hollowfield weren't just symbols of death. They were the mark of a system that thrived on fear and obedience, and everyone knew who was behind them. Dominic, the gardener Rinaldi, a man whose reach stretched far beyond the town's borders, made sure of that. Hollowfield wasn't just ruled by fear. It was ruled by precision. At the heart of the town's shadow stood Dominic, the gardener Rinaldi, a man with a peculiar name, but an even more peculiar power. Rinaldi wasn't just a criminal, he was a tactician, a puppeteer pulling the strings of an empire that thrived in the cracks of Hollowfield's fragile peace. They called him the gardener because he didn't just grow his empire, he cultivated it. Every business, every deal, every secret in Hollowfield passed through his hands. He had people in every corner of the town. The police in his pocket. The mayor, a puppet on strings. Even the local priests didn't dare defy him. Dominic's power didn't come from brute force, it came from trust, or the illusion of it. He had a way of making people feel safe, as long as they stayed in line, and when they didn't, the roses appeared. Dominic had a flair for messages, and the roses weren't just a calling card. They were a promise, a warning, and an end all at once. A rose meant that Rinaldi had seen you, that you'd crossed a line, and that there would be no going back. Even the roses themselves came from one place, Rinaldi's personal greenhouse, a sprawling garden hidden on his estate. They said he would spend hours tending to his plants, each rose as pristine and deliberate as his empire. And yet, for all his power, Rinaldi wasn't untouchable. There were whispers, quiet ones, spoken only in trusted company, that he had enemies, people who were tired of living in fear, people like Thomas Grayson. Domenico, the gardener, Rinaldi's reign over Hollowfield was not built on brute force alone. His power came from his ability to make fear bloom like his infamous white roses, beautiful yet lethal. To the outside world, he was a local businessman, a philanthropist who donated to churches and sponsored town events. But to the people of Hollowfield, he was a shadow that loomed over every decision, every whispered conversation, every locked door. At night, Dominic didn't just control the town, he was the town. Judges took their cues from him. Politicians sought his approval before passing bills. Even the police chief knew where his loyalties lay. There was no such thing as justice in Hollowfield. Only Dominic's justice. Just even the smallest businesses weren't spared. Protection money, they called it. A necessary expense to ensure your windows didn't shatter in the middle of the night, or that your children arrived home safely from school. Dominic never had to issue threats. The roses spoke for him. Even acts of kindness bore his mark. A donation here, a scholarship there. Each gesture came with a silent reminder of who truly ran Hollowfield. To Dominic, the roses weren't just a symbol of fear, they were a message. You're mine. The roses were Dominic's pride and joy. To him, they were a reflection of his power, pure, untainted, and untouchable. But just like his empire, their beauty masked the thorns beneath. For decades, Dominic's power had gone unchecked. But every empire faces a challenge. And in 2007, that challenge came in the form of Thomas Grayson, a young, ambitious prosecutor who dared to believe he could uproot the Syndicate. Grayson wasn't like the others. He refused the bribes, ignored the threats, and went straight for the jugular. His sights were set on Dominic Rinaldi himself. To the people of Hollowfield, it seemed like a suicide mission. But to Grayson, it was justice. Dominic didn't take challenges lightly. He had built his empire on silence and fear, and Grayson's defiance threatened to shatter both. For the first time in decades, cracks began to form in the foundation of his power. Grayson's crusade wasn't just a threat to Dominic, It was a beacon of hope for a town long buried under the Syndicate's shadow. But hope in Hollowfield was a dangerous thing. The roses began to appear more frequently. Families found them on their doorsteps, business owners on their counters, even police officers on their windshields. It was Dominic's way of reminding the town who was in control. But beneath the surface, his empire was beginning to rot. Dominic Rinaldi was a man who thrived on control. But control is a fragile thing. And in Hollowfield, the winds of change had begun to blow. Even within the Syndicate, whispers of dissent began to grow. Some questioned Dominic's decisions. Others feared Grayson's investigations would expose them all. Paranoia seeped into the ranks, turning allies into enemies. Dominic's response to betrayal was swift and brutal. But with every action, he planted more seeds of doubt. His empire was no longer a well-oiled machine. It was a garden overrun with weeds. Grayson wasn't just chipping away at Dominic's empire. He was preparing to bring the whole garden crashing down, and Dominic knew it. Thomas Grayson was not like the others who came before him. He wasn't a man content to sit idly by, letting Hollowfield's darkest secrets fester. Newly elected, barely in his mid-30s, Grayson had inherited a town buried under decades of fear and silence. But for him, silence was not an option. Grayson wasn't naive. He knew the weight of the challenge he faced. He knew what happened to those who stood against the Syndicate. But Grayson also knew something else. If he didn't fight, no one would. Hollowfield deserves better. No one is untouchable. Not even Dominic Rinaldi. Those words sent shockwaves through the town. A prosecutor standing up to Rinaldi? It was unheard of. To the people of Hollowfield, Grayson wasn't just a man. He was a spark of hope. But sparks, as they say, can ignite dangerous fires. Rinaldi heard the challenge loud and clear, and for the first time in decades, Hollowfield's most powerful man felt the faint sting of vulnerability. Grayson had declared war. But Dominic had no intention of playing defense. Grayson knew he couldn't fight this battle alone. His first move was bold. He reached out to the one man Dominic feared most, a retired FBI agent named Robert Kane. Kane had spent years trying to bring Rinaldi down, only to hit walls at every turn. But Grayson's determination rekindled something in him, a belief that this time they might finally win. If you want to take on Rinaldi, you better be prepared to lose everything. He doesn't just destroy you, he destroys everyone around you. To many, Grayson was a hero. To others, he was a fool. In Hollowfield, heroes didn't live long. History was not kind to those who challenged Dominic Rinaldi. And Grayson's crusade had already painted a target on his back. Grayson wasn't the only one at risk. His wife Claire felt the weight of the danger every moment of every day. The Syndicate didn't just threaten their enemies, it went after their families. Is it worth it, Thomas? Fighting them? What happens if you're wrong? What happens if they come for us? They've already taken so much from this town. I can't let them take anything else. The threats began subtly at first. A shadow lingering too long outside his office. An unmarked car parked near his home. But the message was clear. Grayson was being watched. The rose was Dominic's signature, a quiet promise that Grayson's time was running out. But Grayson wasn't backing down. If anything, the threat only fueled his resolve. This isn't just a man we're dealing with. It's an empire. He's got judges, cops, even the damn mayor in his pocket. We need to hit him where it hurts. Kane, Grayson, his money, his fear. Take away the illusion of invincibility, and he crumbles. Grayson began to gather allies. Those who had been hurt by the Syndicate, those who had lost loved ones, those who had been waiting for someone brave enough to fight back. Grayson, this isn't just about bringing down a criminal. It's about giving this town its soul back. The battle lines were drawn. Grayson had declared war. And Dominic Rinaldi was about to show just how far he was willing to go to protect his empire. In a town where silence reigned supreme, Grayson's defiance was a roar that could no longer be ignored. But as the storm began to brew, one question lingered. Could Grayson's fight for justice survive the weight of Hollowfield's darkest secrets? Dominic Rinaldi ruled Hollowfield with ruthless precision. Every deal, every decision, every threat meticulously calculated. And tonight, his next move was no different. Thomas Grayson had dared to defy him, and for that, there would be no forgiveness. Dominic, this isn't just about silencing Grayson. It's about sending a message to anyone foolish enough to think they can defy me. Vincent, it'll be clean, boss. No loose ends. You'll have nothing to worry about. Dominic, make sure of it. And Vincent, don't forget the rose. Let them know who delivered justice. Rinaldi didn't leave things to chance. For a mission this critical, he relied on his most trusted men, each one chosen for their cold precision and unwavering loyalty. Leon, this time, last thing we need is a repeat of the Richards job. Marco, I'm not about to get caught with my pants down because of faulty gear. Vincent, oh, focus. This isn't some low-level punk we're dealing with. It's Grayson. The guy's been a thorn in the boss's side for too long. We do this right, or we don't come back at all. The Syndicate's operations were known for their precision, their perfection, and this hit would be no different. Every step was rehearsed, every contingency planned. To them, failure wasn't just unacceptable, it was Vincent. All right, we move fast. No witnesses, no mistakes. Let's show Grayson what happens when you cross the Syndicate. As the hitmen closed in on their target, the town of Hollowfield seemed to hold its breath. It was Christmas Eve, a night of peace and hope for many. But for Thomas Grayson, it was about to become a night of terror. Leon, you think he'll see it coming? Vincent might suspect it, but it won't matter. He won't have time to stop us. They moved like shadows, invisible to the world around them. To the Syndicate, this wasn't just a job. It was an art. And Grayson's death would be their masterpiece. Marco, they'd be right there, perfect shot. Vincent, not yet. We wait for the signal. Vincent, positions. We go in three men, one mission. In their minds, it was a flawless plan. But in Hollowfield, even perfection wasn't guaranteed. The three men, silent, masked, and armed, move like phantoms, their breath visible in the freezing night air. One of them clutches a revolver. The other two carry walkie-talkies, testing their connection with hushed whispers. The streets of Hollowfield were no stranger to fear, but tonight was different. This wasn't just another hit. It was a declaration. Thomas Grayson, the prosecutor who dared to challenge the Syndicate, was their target. And the message? Crystal clear. No one defied Dominic Rinaldi and lived to tell the tale. The hitmen take their positions around the house, their dark figures barely distinguishable against the shadows of the night. The leader raises a hand, signaling the others to move. They creep closer to the house, their steps careful. Cut to the interior of Grayson's home. He's standing in the kitchen, a steaming mug of coffee in one hand, the other clutching a phone. His voice is calm but determined as he speaks to an unidentified person on the other end. Grayson, no, I won't back down. We have the evidence we need. The Syndicate's days of terror are over. The hitmen close in, their breath visible in the frosty air. The leader pulls out the revolver, his gloved hand steady as he points it toward the window. He peers inside, his target in clear view. The walkie-talkie crackles softly, a voice whispering, "Take the shot." Good job. One shot. Years of dominance and fear rested on this moment. The trigger is pulled. Click. Silence. The leader signals the others to retreat. Their once calm movements now frantic, they bolt toward the woods behind the house. The sound of their boots crunching through the snow is deafening in the quiet night. Breathless and panicked, they argue in hushed tones. Hitman 1. What the hell happened? Hitman 2. The damn gun jammed. It wasn't supposed to jam. Hitman 3. Shut up and keep moving. We need to get out of here before... A sudden crackle of a police scanner interrupts. Shots fired near Maplewood Drive. Units en route. The Syndicate's flawless reputation crumbled in that single moment. For the first time, they weren't the hunters, they were the hunted. The leader stops, glancing back toward Grayson's house. His eyes narrow, frustration and fear etched on his face. Leader, this was supposed to be perfect. We can't leave anything behind. But there's no time to go back. Sirens wail in the distance, growing louder. The hitmen dive into a waiting car parked near the edge of the woods. Tires screech as they speed away, leaving a trail of desperation in their wake. Back inside the house, Grayson hangs up the phone, unaware of how close he had come to death. He glances out the window, his expression thoughtful, as if sensing something amiss. The faint sound of sirens in the distance catches his attention, and he steps closer to the window. The Syndicate's message had failed, but their attempt left a chilling question. If they were bold enough to come this close, what would stop them from trying again? Cut to Dominic Rinaldi in his study, the flames of the fireplace casting flickering shadows on his face. He listens intently as one of his men delivers the news. The hit was botched. Grayson survived. Rinaldi's jaw tightens, his hand gripping the armrest of his chair. Rinaldi. They think this makes him untouchable? No one is untouchable. Rinaldi, this wasn't just a failed hit. It was a stain on his empire. And for Grayson, it was a chilling reminder of the danger he faced. In Hollowfield, even failure left its mark. The rose was more than a signature, it was a promise. And for Grayson, the worst was yet to come. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button, like, and comment. The following morning, Hollowfield awoke under a pale, wintry sky. The blanket of snow covering the suburban neighborhood glistened under the sunlight, but its beauty was betrayed by the crime scene at Grayson's home. Police cars lined the street, their blue and red lights flashing silently as investigators worked methodically. Yellow tape cordoned off the area, and neighbors peered out from behind curtains, whispering rumors that would soon ripple through the town. His heart beat. Inside the house, Grayson sat at the kitchen table, his face pale but composed. A medic tended to a shallow graze on his arm. Inside the modest home, the air was thick with tension. Thomas Grayson sat hunched at the table, his usually steady hands trembling slightly as he clutched a cup of untouched coffee. His shirt was torn where the bullet had grazed him, a stark reminder of how close he had come to death. A medic was tending to the wound while two detectives stood nearby, their notepads poised. His distraction boon. Son detective, Alvarez began, his voice low but urgent. Did you see anything, hear anything unusual before the attack? Grayson shook his head, his eyes fixed on the floor. Nothing, just a click, he muttered, his voice hoarse. The gun jammed. If it hadn't, the room fell silent, the weight of his unspoken words hanging heavily in the air. Grayson finally looked up, his eyes steely with resolve. They want to silence me, he said, his voice gaining strength. They've underestimated me. The detectives exchanged a glance. They knew the Syndicate wasn't used to failure. This was the first time their carefully orchestrated terror had faltered, and it was a crack investigators were determined to exploit. Outside, the crime scene team combed the snow-covered yard and the woods beyond. Their meticulous work uncovered the first hints of the Syndicate's unraveling. A discarded revolver, buried partially in the snow, still bore fingerprints. Nearby, a single footprint, pressed deep into the frozen ground, marked the hurried escape of one of the hitmen. But the most chilling find was discovered near the front steps of Grayson's home. A single long-stemmed white rose, its petals slightly wilted from the frost. Detective Alvarez held it up carefully, his brow furrowed. Their signature, he murmured. They were sending a message. Another officer approached, holding a small torn piece of paper they had found in the woods. Scrawled hastily in pencil, it read, "It's done." The note, discarded in the hitman's panicked escape, was now the first breadcrumb in what would become a trail of evidence leading directly to the Syndicate. Later that day, just as the investigators began connecting the dots, the Hollowfield Police Department received a call that would change everything. The voice on the other end was distorted, but the words were unmistakable. "I know who did it. I know everything." Detective Alvarez leaned forward, gripping the receiver tightly. "Who is this? What do you know?" The caller hesitated, the distortion masking the faint sound of labored breathing. "It was them. Rinaldi's people. But they're slipping. I have proof. Names, places, but I want protection." "Protection?" Alvarez pressed, his tone sharp. "We need more than that." The voice cracked slightly as if the caller was on the verge of tears. "We'll have everything. But if they find out I talked, I'll end up like the others." Before Alvarez could respond, the line went dead. He sat back, running a hand through his hair. The Syndicate's reign was built on fear and loyalty, but fear was a double-edged sword. Someone on the inside had finally decided to betray them. Meanwhile, inside Dominic Rinaldi's sprawling estate, the atmosphere was anything but calm. The news of the botched hit had spread quickly among the Syndicate's inner circle, and the once invincible aura of the organization was beginning to fray. Rinaldi sat in his study, the glow of the fireplace casting long shadows across the room. His fingers tapped rhythmically against the arm of his leather chair, a sign of the tension he worked hard to mask. Oh, across from him, Bernie the Blade Caruso, his trusted enforcer, shifted uncomfortably. "We'll fix this, boss," Bernie said, his voice lacking its usual confidence. "Grayson won't last long. We'll—" "Enough," Rinaldi interrupted, his voice cold and sharp. "It's not about Grayson anymore. It's about them." He gestured vaguely toward the world outside. "The police, the feds, every outsider who smells blood because of your incompetence." Bernie flinched but said nothing. Rinaldi leaned forward, his piercing gaze locking onto his lieutenant. "Find the weak link. Someone talked, someone failed. And if you don't fix it, Bernie, I'll plant a rose on your grave." The room fell silent, the weight of Rinaldi's words suffocating. The cracks in the Syndicate weren't just external, they were beginning to spread from within. The following day, Grayson's case caught the attention of the FBI. Agents swarmed Hollowfield, their presence a stark reminder that the Syndicate's actions were no longer confined to whispers and shadows. Agent Sarah Whitmore, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for dismantling criminal empires, arrived with a small team, ready to dig deeper. Whitmore wasted no time. She met with Detective Alvarez and Grayson, her sharp eyes scanning every piece of evidence laid out before her. The rose, the gun, the footprint. All pieces of a puzzle she was determined to solve. "This isn't just about Grayson," Whitmore said, her tone firm. "This is about bringing down the entire Syndicate. But we need more. We need someone on the inside." Grayson nodded, his jaw tightening. "Someone already reached out. An anonymous Cole. They know everything." Whitmore's eyes narrowed. "Then let's make sure they talk." As news of the attempted hit spread, Hollowfield's residents found themselves trapped in a state of unease. The Syndicate's power, once unshakable, now seemed vulnerable. Whispers of hope mixed with fear as people speculated about what would happen next. At a local diner, two factory workers spoke in hushed tones over cups of coffee. "You think they'll finally bring him down?" one asked, glancing over his shoulder as if Rinaldi himself might appear. The other shrugged, his expression grim. "If they don't, we're all screwed." You know what happens when the Syndicate feels threatened. Back in his office, Grayson looked out the window at the town he had sworn to protect. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, he felt the tide beginning to turn. The Syndicate's power was cracking, and Grayson was determined to shatter it completely. The stage was now set. The Syndicate's secrets were unraveling, and with every piece of evidence uncovered, Hollowfield edged closer to the truth. But in a town ruled by fear, the path to justice was fraught with danger. Would the cracks in the Syndicate's empire widen, or would they close ranks and silence their enemies once and for all? The answer lay in the shadows, and in the courage of those willing to face them. The apartment was small, its dim lighting casting long shadows on the cracked walls. The informant, A woman in her late 20s with weary eyes and trembling hands sat on the edge of a tattered couch, her gaze fixed on the floor. The sound of her shallow breathing filled the room as FBI agents Agent Sarah Whitmore and Detective Alvarez approached cautiously, their movements deliberate to avoid startling her. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," Agent Whitmore said gently, her voice calm but firm. "We understand how difficult this is," the woman, later identified as Clara Morgan, the ex-girlfriend of one of the hitmen, nodded slightly but didn't look up. "You don't understand," she whispered. "If they find out I'm talking to you, I'm dead. No protection in the world will save me." Whitmore exchanged a glance with Alvarez, both understanding the weight of her words. "You're not just helping us, Clara. You're helping Hollowfield. Every piece of information you share brings us closer to taking them down for good." Clara hesitated, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her sweater. Finally, she reached for a battered manila envelope beside her. "This," she said, pushing it across the table, "is everything I know. Dates, names, places. Even the money trails." Whitmore opened the envelope carefully, her practiced eyes scanning the documents inside. There were handwritten notes, receipts, and even photographs. Evidence that tied the Syndicate directly to the attempted hit on Grayson and a web of other crimes spanning decades. Clara's voice grew steadier as she began recounting her time with the Syndicate. "They never trusted outsiders," she said. "Even me. I was always on the fringe, but I saw enough to know how they operate." She described secret meetings in the backrooms of Hollowfield's oldest businesses, money laundering through seemingly legitimate ventures, and the code words they used to discuss hits. "When they talked about gardening," Clara explained, "it wasn't about flowers. It was about burying problems." Whitmore leaned in, her pen scribbling furiously in her notebook. "What about the white roses?" she asked. Clara hesitated, her face darkening. That was Rinaldi's signature. It was his way of saying, "This wasn't random. This was me." He wanted people to know who was in charge without ever saying it out loud. As she spoke, flashbacks of her life with the Syndicate filled the screen. Clara watching from a distance as Rinaldi handed envelopes stuffed with cash to Hollowfield's officials, her silent horror as she overheard plans for murders discussed like business transactions. Clara's breaking point came the night of the botched hit on Grayson. "I heard them talking afterward," she confessed, her voice trembling. "They were panicked. The gun jamming wasn't part of the plan, and then I heard something that chilled me to my core. Rinaldi said if they couldn't kill Grayson, they'd target his family next." The weight of her words hung heavily in the room. "I couldn't be part of it anymore," Clara whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I couldn't keep pretending I didn't know what they were doing." Whitmore reached out, placing a reassuring hand on Clara's shoulder. "You're doing the right thing," she said. "We'll protect you, but we need you to be brave for just a little while longer." Armed with Clara's information, the FBI and local police launched one of the largest operations in Hollowfield's history. Raids were conducted simultaneously across the town, targeting the Syndicate's known hideouts, businesses, and even the homes of their most trusted members. The scene was chaotic, agents in tactical gear storming into buildings, stacks of cash and weapons being seized, and men in suits being led away in handcuffs. Dominic Rinaldi himself was taken from his mansion, his face expressionless as cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions. The once untouchable kingpin of Hollowfield's underworld was now just another criminal facing justice. Through it all, Clara remained hidden under FBI protection, her identity a closely guarded secret. But her contributions were undeniable. The documents she provided not only tied Rinaldi to the attempted hit on Grayson, but also uncovered decades of corruption and violence that had plagued Hollowfield. As the evidence mounted, the Syndicate's loyal members began to crack. Some turned informant themselves, desperate to save their own skins. Others clung to silence, hoping against hope that Rinaldi's empire could somehow survive. For years, the Syndicate ruled Hollowfield with fear and violence. They silenced their enemies, controlled the town's leaders, and left a trail of devastation in their wake. But in the end, it was the courage of one woman, one unlikely hero, that brought them to their knees. The camera lingered on an image of Clara, her face obscured for anonymity, but her bravery unmistakable. Her actions didn't just expose the Syndicate, they gave Hollowfield a chance to reclaim its soul. As Rinaldi and his associates faced trial, the people of Hollowfield began to hope for a brighter future. The white roses, once a symbol of fear, were replaced by real flowers planted in gardens and parks. A quiet but powerful reminder that the town was moving forward. Detective Alvarez ran his fingers over one of the flowers, his face a mixture of curiosity and unease. "They're perfect," he murmured. "Too perfect." Agent Sarah Whitmore followed closely behind, her eyes scanning the rose like they held the answers to decades of unsolved crimes. "This isn't just a greenhouse," she said, her voice low. "This is a message. Every petal, every thorn. It's all part of Rinaldi's narrative." The discovery of the greenhouse was more than just another piece of evidence. It was a chilling window into Dominic Rinaldi's psyche. The white roses weren't just flowers. They were his signature, his calling card, and his unspoken message to Hollowfield. "Death is beautiful, and I am its gardener." To Rinaldi, the roses symbolized control. To him, they represented purity, but not the kind that brings peace. This was a purity born of destruction, a cleansing by his own hand. Leaving a rose wasn't just a threat, it was a declaration. Investigators uncovered more than just flowers in the greenhouse. Hidden beneath the floorboards was a worn leather journal, its pages filled with meticulous notes in Rinaldi's handwriting. Each entry detailed a life taken, a rose left behind, and the reasoning behind it. Whitmore flipped through the journal, her face pale. "It's not just a list of names," she said. "It's his manifesto. He believed he was creating order in chaos, deciding who deserved to live and who didn't." One passage stood out. "The rose is a reminder. Beauty in death, purity in violence. They'll never forget me. Not in this life. Not in the next." The entries revealed a man who saw himself as an artist, crafting his legacy one life at a time. But it also hinted at paranoia. Rinaldi wrote of those who had betrayed him, of whispers in the shadows, and of his belief that his empire would one day crumble. The roses, he wrote, were his way of ensuring he was remembered, even if everything else was taken from him. As investigators pieced together the meaning of the roses, they realized the full extent of Rinaldi's psychological manipulation. Each rose wasn't just a token left behind. It was a warning to the living. It said, "I control this town. I decide who stays and who goes." In Hollowfield, the roses became a language of their own. They whispered secrets the town was too afraid to hear. They marked the boundaries of Rinaldi's power and reminded everyone that no one was safe. Residents recounted their memories of finding roses in unexpected places, on their doorsteps, in their mailboxes, even on the desks of local officials. Each time, it was a chilling reminder of the Syndicate's reach. But the roses also became the Syndicate's undoing. For years, they had been a symbol of Rinaldi's invincibility, but now they were evidence. Investigators began matching the roses to crime scenes, tracing the specific breed of flower back to Rinaldi's greenhouse. The soil samples, the unique cultivation methods, it all tied back to him. Alvarez stood in the greenhouse, holding up a rose as he addressed his team. "This," he said, "is the key." He thought he was untouchable, but he left a trail. One petal at a time. The roses weren't just a tool of control for Rinaldi. They were a source of fear for Hollowfield's residents. Survivors of Syndicate violence spoke of sleepless nights and the constant dread of finding a rose where it didn't belong. One resident, an elderly woman whose son had disappeared years ago, recounted finding a rose on her windowsill the morning after he vanished. It wasn't just a flower, she said, her voice breaking. It was a message. They wanted me to know they could get to anyone. Anytime, the emotional weight of the roses became a collective burden for the town. They weren't just symbols of death. They were reminders of a community held hostage by fear. As the evidence against Rinaldi mounted, the roses became a central piece of the case. Prosecutors used them to tie him to dozens of crimes, painting a vivid picture of his reign of terror. The once pristine flowers, now withered and decayed, were displayed in court as a haunting reminder of his legacy. Rinaldo thought the roses would make him immortal, that they would preserve his power and fear long after he was gone. But in the end, they were his undoing. In the wake of Rinaldi's arrest, the greenhouse was torn down. The white roses, once a symbol of fear, were replaced with vibrant wildflowers planted by Hollowfield's residents. It was a small but significant act of reclaiming their town. Grayson, standing in the now empty lot where the greenhouse once stood, reflected on the town's journey. Roses were never about beauty, he said. They were about control. But now, Hollowfield belongs to its people again. As the screen faded to black, the narrator delivered a final haunting line. The roses of Hollowfield will never bloom again, but their memory lingers, a reminder of the darkness that once ruled and the courage it took to reclaim the light. Thomas Grayson fought for justice and emerged victorious. But victory in Hollowfield doesn't come without a price. The Syndicate is gone, but their shadow remains. For every arrest, for every name crossed off the Syndicate's list, there are whispers of those who vanished without a trace. Grayson steps to a podium, his voice steady but tinged with sorrow. This town has endured years of fear. Together, we have begun to reclaim Hollowfield. But we must never forget the lives lost, the families broken, and the silence that allowed it all to thrive. The crowd listens intently, some nodding, others wiping away tears. Among them stands an elderly woman clutching a photograph of her son, one of the Syndicate's many victims. Her eyes glisten as Grayson's words resonate. Hollowfield may have survived, but its ghosts remain. Every empty chair at a dinner table, every abandoned home, every rose petal scattered to the wind. They all speak of a time when fear reigned supreme. The screen flashes to a darkened alleyway where a single white rose lies forgotten, crushed underfoot. The image lingers, a stark reminder of the Syndicate's grip and the lives lost in their pursuit of power. Hollowfield is not the same town it once was. The people who lived in fear now walk with courage. Together they are rebuilding not just their homes, but their trust in one another. Grayson, now standing beside local leaders at a town hall meeting, speaks with quiet determination. We can't erase the past, but we can honor it by ensuring it never happens again. Hollowfield deserves better, and together, we'll make sure it has a future. The Syndicate may be gone, but their shadows stretch long. For many, the fear hasn't faded, it's simply changed shape. And the question remains, how do you trust again when the very air you breathe once held secrets too dark to face? In a quiet moment, Grayson sits alone in his office, the room lit by a single desk lamp. He stares at a photograph on his desk, an image of himself with his wife and young daughter taken before his fight against the Syndicate began. His eyes linger on their smiles, a stark contrast to the storm he weathered to keep them safe. Thomas Grayson gave everything to bring Hollowfield justice, but justice comes at a cost. For every battle won, there's a scar, a reminder that some wounds never fully heal. Grayson flips through a file containing photos of the Syndicate's victims, pausing on each face. His hand hovers over a white rose petal taped to one of the pages, left at the scene of a crime that still haunts him. He closes the file and exhales deeply. The scene cuts to the site of the demolished greenhouse where Rinaldi once cultivated his roses. Now the lot is overgrown with wildflowers, vibrant and untamed. Children run through the field, their laughter echoing through the air. A plaque has been erected at the edge of the field, Reading. In memory of the lives lost and the resilience of those who remain, the white roses may be gone, but Hollowfield's spirit endures. Town that once lived in fear now dares to hope, to dream, and to heal. The roses of Hollowfield. Trust no one. What would you do if your town was held hostage by fear? Could you stand up against the darkness? Or would you be consumed by it? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe as we uncover more stories of betrayal, resilience, and the secrets that shape our world.